Okay, our theme for this month, as you may have heard, is covenant. I'm really looking forward to that. I think it's really, really an important issue for us and a broader issue as well right now. For the opening reading, I'm going to do just a brief excerpt from a document that I'll refer to a little bit later, which is a comprehensive guide to congregational covenants. I found this online and it was authored by the UUA Congregational Life Staff Group. And it is really comprehensive, lots of links. We'll make sure that we get the link posted one way or the other so you can refer to it. But I'd like to read you a brief excerpt. If Unitarian Universalism's crux were reduced to a few points in space and time, they would be those potent moments just before and just after we keep promises or break them. The power of those moments is simple, shocking, and science-based. I thought that was pretty interesting. And we'll refer back to that document as well. Let's do a chalice lighting. I will read if someone will light. Love is the spirit of this church and service its law, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, to serve human needs, and to help one another. And I'll start us. Thanks again.
Great. I'm gonna allow you to unmute yourselves and feel free to pipe up with a joy or a concern.
My candle was lit. I think I may have mentioned a friend of ours in Denver who a few weeks ago lost two members of her family, one in Denver and one in Texas to the virus. And she and the rest of her family are doing okay. And to my son and daughter-in-law who are in Phoenix, which is an interesting place to be right now, and also doing well. So our just thoughts and well wishes and appreciation for the fact that they're doing well.
And we're going to light a candle for Doug's safe travels on Tuesday back to Vienna. Gabriela is already there and Doug looks forward to his 28-hour trip. Yeah.
I'd like to add one from my sister who's in greenhouse living and continues to be on a plateau, which is a low plateau rather than a high one, but hanging in there. And they're taking good care of the people out there. So we're fortunate for that. And we talked through the window or on the phone through the window. And we're just hoping that we can get past all this before we hear of any deaths or worsening there.
I'd like to light a candle for my niece, Susanna, and her now husband, who had a COVID wedding yesterday, scaled way back from what they had originally planned. It was just their immediate families with them, and next year's the big party.
I'd like to light a candle for the fact that we got the Zoom up and running, and it took a tremendous amount of work from Ian, and thank you to him, and it is really nice to see everyone.
I'm gonna go ahead and light a candle. I want to steal your thunder. Do you want to light one too?
You go for it.
Okay, I might light two then.
Go.
I have a concern my cousin, who I've had something of a troubled relationship with, his liver is failing. And he called and apologized, which is something that I guess I never expected, but also knew that I needed. One of those things where maybe I had been working on forgiveness for a long time, but actually hearing the other person acknowledge the need for that was huge. So he has a chance to get a new liver. So I'm glad that I worked on the concept of prayer, because I'm definitely working on that side of things for him, since there's not much else I can do. But he's in Seattle now, and he's optimistic. So I'm also going to light a candle of joy because Susie Clinch has finally moved into her new house, and it's really exciting. And that was, we had great fun. I got a chainsaw, and I already started cutting things down for her. Uh-oh. Yeah.
Houses or shrubbery?
Shrubbery.
Oh,
Shrubbery.
It's already cut down now.
I'd like to add one real quickly. I had an opportunity this weekend to briefly attend a Wounded Warriors gathering and to ride in a light observation chopper with other veterans who were blasting away with AR-15s at targets on the ground. But it brought back some memories, and it didn't negatively affect me as it might have, I guess. But it was quite an experience. It's the first time in 50 years plus that I've been in a chopper. So it was.
You weren't blasting.
And I wasn't blasting. I didn't take a weapon. No. So it was a different experience.
Actually, I'm going to do one more. Kind of an overlap with you, Bruce. My friend Jimmy, who went from being at Woodstock to being co-pilot in a helicopter within 1 week. Amazing guy, really fun. Is also waiting for a liver right now, and so we're thinking about him, and he is doing well. Anyone else? Okay. Oh, sure. Ian kindly reminded me that we'll light one more candle for those who have joys and concerns who remain unspoken. Our reading for reflective silence will be a little bit different today. I'm going to read our covenant just because I think one of the things I found as we went into this month is that I've kind of always embraced our UU principles a bit more enthusiastically than I have our covenant. And I actually had to look it up to remember how it goes. And I'm really curious, have been curious. I've been thinking a lot about why that hasn't been more a part of my UU experience. And so I'd like to start with that. But what I'll do is I'm going to read at 4 intervals during our moment of silence. And the reason will be clear as I do that. So that'll feel a little different, but to begin with, I'll read the first part of our covenant. And what I'd like you to do after I read it, as you sit, is think about what does that look like. We gather in fellowship, respecting the supreme worth of every person. What does that look like? We encourage and support each individual's quest for meaning. What does that look like? We come together to develop our individual spiritual values. What does that look like? We respect and celebrate our differences. And what does that look like?
Put you back down on the table so you can hear.
Spirit of light, come unto me.
What's that? Okay. Now, bottom left. Is there a
Victor was trying to tell us something.
Okay.
Okay. So as I mentioned, I've been thinking lately a lot about why covenant hasn't been more a part of my UU experience. And this month is my chance to enlist all of you to help me figure that out. Thanks for volunteering. Let's get to work. First, some questions, and there will probably be more. We are UUs, and questioning is pretty much what we do. Why does covenant not resonate with some of us like principles have? How is covenant different from principles and other similar statements? How might covenant help us to bring more life-affirming relationship and action into a world that so clearly needs some of something, like a ship that's dangerously listing too far to port or starboard? For you non-sailors, that's left or right. Sorry, I couldn't help myself with that one. I found the Comprehensive Guide to Congregational Covenants, as I said, written by the UUA Congregational Life Staff Group. And I'll go back to that and just read some of the introduction. And I'd really encourage you to check that out if you're interested. There are lots of links. What I'll share with you this morning is pretty brief. Covenant is the silk that joins Unitarian Universalist congregations, communities, and individuals together in a web of interconnection. The practice of promising to walk together is the precious core of our creedless faith. Covenant is both a noun and a verb. It can be written agreement among individual community members, promising to behave in certain ways. And it can mean to engage in mutual promises with spirit, with other people, and with communities. Congregational covenants can take many forms and can reflect the needs and best wishes of a variety of groups, from church committee members to staff groups, to how members of an entire congregation agree to be in right relationship with one another. Creating and agreeing to a covenant can be an extremely effective tool for building a foundation of trust. By creating shared expectations around the behaviors we want to cultivate, we come closer to creating the beloved community. A covenant is also the positive expression of healthy behavior, so that leaders have more clarity in identifying and responding to disruptive behavior. And just another brief touch on this document. Besides this introduction, there's a section on the history of covenant, the science of covenant, the theology of covenant, and creating and practicing covenant. So I would encourage you to look closer at that if you have some interest. But in just those few paragraphs of introduction, promise was mentioned 4 times. Behavior was mentioned 4 times. And we can begin to get some sense of the potential difference between covenant and, for instance, principles. I'm just amazingly connected to our principles, and as far as I can remember, there's nowhere in our principles that talk about a promise or about behavior. So that begins to sort of hint at what might be a difference with covenant. As I browsed through the guide to congregational covenants, I was led to think about norms, which is a topic I've been immersed in for most of my adult life. If our wish is to enhance and encourage right relationship and life-affirming action within our fellowship and beyond, my biased opinion is that we have to talk about norms. And I won't go into a lengthy definition because most of you probably know that. But norms are the real rules. Norms are the expected and reinforced behaviors of a group. It's what people really do, either in cooperation with spoken or written agreements or not. Any group, this is any group. We have laws and rules and guidelines and principles and covenants. But what people in a group really do is significantly influenced by a group's norms, which are frequently not written or formalized. Normative behavior is often just, that's how we do things around here. The difference between desired norms, the norms we wish to create, as expressed in laws or principles or covenant, and real norms, which is how we're most likely to actually behave, can be best thought of as a norms gap. Quick examples. Interstate speed limit is either 75 or 85, depending on what's posted. Most people drive at a speed they're comfortable with, or at a speed others are driving, kind of clustered by the slow driving group, the speed limit driving group, and the fast driving group, where the norm is driving just over the speed limit, thinking they won't get pulled over for 4 miles an hour over. Wearing a face mask changes based on what others are doing. If I'm in a social group that thinks masks are an affront to our freedom, I'll wear one seldom, if at all. Racial injustice in the face of so many laws that prohibit that is a function of norms. And systemic racism and sexism endure due to the persistence of social norms, both conscious and unconscious and subconscious, that support those systems. And often the norms that are below the radar of our conscious awareness are the strongest. And I think increasing the ways that we can be aware of, we can have better radar in terms of what our norms are as a group and what the gap might be. I think that really increases our effectiveness and our bond. My own time of highest and deepest awareness of the power of norms was during my time at a residential treatment program, where treatment was primarily based on building and supporting positive norms within a culture of from 50 to 150 high-risk adolescents, most placed by the courts based on their illegal, unsafe, or frightening behavior. Our society didn't and doesn't know what to quote unquote do with large numbers of youth that are in that category. The heart and core of our program was positive behavior based on real life positive group norms. Probably the most important realization for me during that time, more than 20 years ago, and for 20 years, was during those exhilarating times when both staff and students were enthusiastically and honestly creating and supporting a specific contract, much like a covenant for pro-social norms. I believe that all 150 staff could have gone on vacation for a few days, and that group of 150 high-risk adolescents with significant issues, quote unquote, could have run a program and a community that was safe, productive, respectful of each other, and supportive of good communication and of learning. I was frequently brought to tears by the power of those students' positive work with each other. That is an exciting reality. There's another side to that reality. When neither staff nor students were sufficiently invested in that contract for positive norms, and the norms gap was significant, the presence of 150 staff was barely enough to maintain the community's safety, let alone growth and achievement. And the work was really, really hard for both students and staff. And that experience brings me to think a lot about our current discussions about law enforcement, because I think there's some similarities. If norms are destructive and there's a huge gap between how we wish to live together and how we do live together in a community, there are simply not enough enforcers to make that okay if the norms are not embraced by the members of the community and if they don't work together to form positive ones. And of course, UU of Sheridan is not a treatment program, at least most of the time. It serves that purpose for me sometimes. I mention this example because I think it's possible that some of the specific norms-based tools that program used to create and support relationships and actions that really worked may also be useful for us. Just tools, just ways to look at that. The norms contract is one. It's similar to covenant. And in that program, it was really simple. We commit to safety, respect, setting and reaching goals, and confronting negative or unsafe behavior. For each of those 4 elements, and I think this is critical, there was a statement of, by this we mean, and it was stated in terms of behavior. Similar to my question during the meditation about what does that look like. So for instance, for norms around safety, by that we mean, this was the students and staff, we won't hit, push, or grab others. We won't threaten or intimidate. We will support each other's safety. For respect, we'll not use insults or derogatory terms about or toward others. We'll express appreciation and support to each other even when we disagree. For setting and reaching goals, we will set educational and life goals, accept help with them, help others with their goals. And for confronting negative or unsafe behavior, we'll address unsafe or disrespectful or irresponsible or defeating actions in a timely, respectful, direct manner. Keeping in mind, this was a group of students who had not found success in their lives. And by using some of those tools, they were able to achieve significant success. Not in every case, nothing's perfect, but it was pretty amazing. Additional tools are that there was regular training around norms and what they mean and how to support them. There was assessment of where we were with norms on a program-to-program basis, and it was part of assessments of both students and staff, how they operated and embraced positive norms. And I think that attention in a specific way helped us to develop and follow norms in a really productive way. It's a different program, different focus, different time. But revisiting those effects to use a norms contract to enhance positive behaviors helped me to understand and appreciate covenant and concepts of covenant in a deeper way. Let's go back to our earlier questions and see what may have evolved as we've wandered through this exploration of covenant and norms and gaps. First question was, why does covenant not resonate with some of us UUs in the same way as our principles? One thing is that it's sometimes difficult to grasp what a covenant means and how it's different, and we can talk about that. Part of that is we are freedom lovers. That is central to all of what we do. And covenant can be perceived as overly binding, especially with reference to promises and behavior. Many UUs have good reason to question directives or constraints. So any involvement with a covenant that talks about behavior or about promises will be addressed from that viewpoint. And we can do that discussion, and I think that would be productive. but we are justifiably wary of dogma, restriction, and cookie cutters. Words have power. When I say something, it becomes real. It occurs to me that I have modified some of my traditional sayings from my early childhood, especially because if I say something, I want it to be congruent with my values and beliefs. It's more honest for me and for others. For instance, I have an alternate pledge of allegiance that I use along with the traditional pledge. Neither diminishes the other. I pledge allegiance to the fact of the united status of humanity and to the reality for which I stand, one global nation, inner good, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. One of my earliest and dearest memories was saying that "now I lay me down to sleep" prayer with my mom. The words to that prayer are now inauthentic for me, and I think frightening for children. Therefore, now I lay me down to rest, cradled in our earthly nest. If I should die before I rise, I'll be the stardust in your eyes. My mom would like this version too. Two covenant-like statements that can retain power and relevance in a person's life when amended to be congruent with current beliefs and commitments. It seems that covenant can be crafted within the same balance and with the understanding that covenant is not about perfection, but rather about our finding our way together. Second question earlier was, how is covenant different from principles and other similar documents? We've touched on that some. My recent understanding is that covenant, while congruent with and an extension of our principles, carries more of a tone of promise, expectation, and awareness, not just of thought and belief, but of behavior and action, while tempered with an understanding that it's about our helping each other not to be perfect or to conform, but to consider and dialogue and dream about our behavior as an expression of belief. It's a challenging balance. Much further discussion is guaranteed if we revisit this issue, which we'll do in some ways this month. Interestingly, my recollection is that one positive follow-up to our last discussion of covenant was our development of guidelines for assuring the safety of children who are part of our fellowship. And that was good action, I think. Third question was, how might covenant help us to bring about life-affirming relationships and actions in a world that clearly needs some writing? A simple process and model that I like for addressing difficulties or challenges is what, so what, and now what. For example, an example that quickly came to my mind, what is a what? An existence, a fact in the world right now is that sex trafficking means that groups of people bring children to almost any large event that happens in the country for the purposes of selling them for sex. It's a fact. So what? Obviously that destroys children. It's intolerable. Now what is, what do we do about that? One example is there are volunteer groups right now that are attending those events that have information about recently kidnapped or runaway youth, and they go prepared with pictures and ask around, and many of those youth that have been kept away from their families have been found. So that's the now what. I think that's a good question for us to ask about whatever we want to focus on. Covenant may help us to address the now what part of that, which is more fully reachable if we have more tools at our disposal. Another good thing is just to ask ourselves how we're doing with Covenant. What's working really well? What do we wish was working better? What do we wish was producing more positive results? Is there anything that we can do with that? So I think a good challenge for us is just to be individually or as a group to be more clear about the behaviors that we value and expect from ourselves and each other. Maybe referencing a shared belief, then adding, by that we mean, with examples of behaviors or actions that live into that belief. How do we make it okay and important to acknowledge, explore, and even embrace the gap between how we wish to behave and the reality that we sometimes do otherwise? As Parker Palmer writes, sometimes the gap is tragic, but it's also fertile ground where we can learn and grow individually and collectively. A final example. I've been challenged lately with becoming frustrated and impatient when being told the same story or asked the same question over and over in a short period of time. I don't know if that may sound familiar to anyone else. I don't blow up, but I know that sometimes my response is brusque and dismissive. And I know how it feels to be the person on the receiving end of that as well. So I catch myself and I hate it. And then I'm brusque and dismissive with myself. Yuck. No good in any of that. When I finally slow down and breathe and curiously think and feel my way into that gap between who I want to be versus how I sometimes behave. And I use some tools at my disposal to see that more clearly. Then I see that gap in the same sense that when we say, I see you to another person, I see that I'm scared and worried about those lapses in tracking and memory, not just for others, but for myself. I see that when I ask questions and repeat myself, I'm just wanting to connect and be clear and processing out loud and wanting it and me to be okay. So out of that tragic gap, that fertile gap, with some tools comes a fuller recognition that we're in it together, all of it, all of us. And I can return to my best self. And I can reconnect with the other person in right relationship. Not easy, but it can happen. It's really hard to embrace and enter that gap alone and without guidance and without tools. And I know that having been and continuing to be in the spoken and unspoken covenant of our fellowship helps me to do those hard things. And I know that I can come before you and tell you this story. And then also tell you that my age-related memory issues have been with me since age 6 or 7. It's true, and we can laugh. Perhaps covenant is our declaration of interdependence. If so, we have a covenant, stated and implied, and maybe we can be even better. Why not? I see you, even virtually. Thank you.
I'm going to figure this out, I promise.
Okay.
Bear with me, everyone. First time. Okay. Almost there. Appear all the same. Gather in peace, gather in hands, gather in sympathy now and then. Gather in hope, compassion and strength. Gather to celebrate once again. Seeds for the sowing are laid in store, nurtured in love and conscience refined, with body and spirit united once more. Gather in peace, gather in thanks, gather in sympathy now and then. Gather in hope, compassion and strength. Gather to celebrate once again. Gather the spirits growing in awe, drawn by the moon and fed by the sun. Winter to spring and summer to fall, the chorus of life resounding as one. Gather in peace, gather in thanks, gather in sympathy now and then. Gather in hope, compassion and strength. Gather to celebrate once again.
Okay, let's see. I'm looking for the words to our offertory.
Oh.
But we can do it without the words.
I think I know them.
Okay,
Okay.
go.
Let this be an offering to sustain and strengthen this place, which is so sacred to many of us, a community of memory and of hope, for we are the keepers of the dream.
And we would invite you to use the online options for contributing to the fellowship. Those are available in several different ways, and we can answer any questions you may have about making those contributions. Because luckily, here we are keeping the lights on.
Yeah.
And looking right at them. So thank you for that. closing words today are an excerpt from a poem by Rainer Maria Rilke. Be patient toward all that is unsolved in your heart, and try to love the questions themselves. Live the questions now. Perhaps you will then gradually, without noticing it, live along some distant day into the answers. Thank you so much. Let's extinguish the chalice.
Or do we have discussion first?
Oh, let's have some discussion
Let's
first.
do discussion
All right,
first.
we're discussing.
I will set it so you can unmute yourselves as you like and feel free to chime in with your thoughts and questions.
Hi there, Cal. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you for a very thoughtful and very sincere presentation of Covenant. What a great way to start us off for the month. I guess the thing that struck me the most about, I mean, there were many wonderful points in your talk, but the thing that struck me the most was the question of this trade-off between the loss of freedom when we submit ourselves to covenant and the power of what can be achieved both collectively and individually. And the example that you gave of your work at NSI and how that power of the group, when they were living into covenant, even if they didn't call it that, worked to the advantage of everyone's growth. But yet it meant giving up something. And so that model, I think, could apply to congregations, to recovery communities, to nations, right? Because I think you wanted to make the point that that covenant has something to say about our role in the world and our future as a people on the planet, and how we can resolve conflict. So that's kind of where that's what I got from your talk. I want to comment further on that, feel free to. It's not really a question, just my reaction.
Well, I appreciate that, Victor. Thank you. And that was what I was getting at. And it's really complex. The only thing I would add to that, which is more complexity, but I think one of the facts of the world is not, if you think about covenant as a contract or as norms that exist in our group, it's not a question of whether or not we have that. The question is whether we are conscious and mindful about that, whether we do our best to grow and nurture that in a positive direction, or whether we just operate more on what most people are doing, or what the most positive or popular or influential people are doing. Just another whole discussion is about what builds norms, and it's interesting. But I think we've, obviously we've got them, like it or not, good and bad, and it makes sense to be a more mindful part of that process. Thanks, Victor.
I'd like to say that I see our beliefs as things that are in our head and in our hearts, and the covenant is more action oriented. And Victor, you were to submit. I would say the covenant has to do with what we commit ourselves to do, and sometimes the struggle people have with not having enough freedom is really committing to and living those beliefs.
I appreciate that. And it's tough. And it's a trade-off. And part of what's, I think, can be scary is that you don't really know how that's going to play out. It's not always easy to predict the outcomes when you enter into that process. There aren't any guarantees. And then I think the assurance needs to be, if you're going to do that mindful work with covenant, that again, we're not looking for perfection. We're not trying to set up covenant that's going to last for all eternity without change, because that clearly won't work. At least that's my belief. Well, I appreciate your comments. Thanks, Bruce.
I wanted to add a couple of thoughts. I was involved in writing our original covenant probably 30 years ago, and I recall very little about the process. I know several of us worked on it, and it was our best effort, but when I read the words as they have evolved and come into our present discussion today, I'm struck by how much we have emphasized the rights and the privileges of the individual and supporting that individual's efforts to grow and change and develop their system of belief that will carry them through. And I reflect back on times when there has been conflict in our community, and I think that much of that conflict has had to do with trying to maybe request some limits of an individual person with the idea that the needs of the group have been compromised somehow in the process of this individual trying to express their needs or opinions that might have sort of trod on the needs of the group. And I think we can all think of examples. But then, so I have learned over the years that I think covenant is something that we do whether or not we have a word for it. And interestingly, I think we've done a pretty good job at shaping ourselves into a functional group. And one example I think of is candle lighting. There are many fellowships and congregations that have given up candle lighting because they could not manage individual needs to express themselves too many times or too long or whatever. And it just became so contentious, they just said, let's not do this anymore. And we have worked at that over the years. We've had times when that was not as comfortable as it is now, but for the most part, people really respect the norms of the group. And that's just an example. But then the thing that really strikes me, of course, is the current political situation and how much damage has been done by individuals and groups who have flaunted and trod upon the norms of society, and how difficult it is to rein that in. It's hard to write a law for everything so that we can agree on what appropriate behavior is. But when somebody just throws out those group norms, the damage that creates is heartbreaking. So I guess I say that, I'm sure many of us had that insight today, but I say that just to kind of emphasize the importance of those group norms, whether they're implicit or explicit.
Thanks, Janet. And you touched really well on this. My implication by my closing story is that I think if you're talking in terms of a norms gap, I think as a group, our norms gap is pretty small. I mean, I think our intent and our behaviors, for the most part, match pretty well. Not to say that we can't get better, not to say that looking at ourselves as a group is a whole lot tougher than looking at any other group you want to pick in the universe. But I think finding a balance with how to do that and how much to do that could be productive. I appreciate you, and I agree with you that the world is it's in need of some covenant. And I can't help but think that there are some things that people in all of these many conflicted groups do believe in common, but we're just not getting there. It's not, that's my concern. I don't think it's a total lack of overlap with belief. I think it's just not valuing the process of getting to common ground.
And I would just add, in my own experience, the thing that has made the UU group special is that emphasis on we're a community and we don't just walk away. We have a commitment to work through our differences, challenge ourselves within that group to be our best selves and accept the feedback and work within the structure of the group to learn about ourselves and how to conduct ourselves with ethics and respect in the constraints of a group. And that's been valuable in my own personal life, to have that challenge made to me.
I'd like to note that something that you just said, Cal, about moving toward a better place, that it's really important to understand that although we might not get to whatever perfection is, the important thing is not to give up the fight. And we are not expected to complete that. We are expected to carry on the work toward a better place.
Yeah.
And there's a rabbi that said that a lot better than I did.
Well, that wasn't, your statement wasn't bad. I really agree. Thanks for adding that.
Go ahead, Sue.
First off, I have a favorite quote in life. Normal is a setting on the dryer. And else. And I think that helps me so much in terms of mental health and relaxing and being self-critical. I thought I would share that one about norms. One thing I really, really liked was before your talk, or maybe it was in your talk, I'm sorry, but the silk of the group, and I heard silk and I went, oh, cool. And then, silk web. And, usually it's like ties that bind, and it was silk that bound. And I thought that was so, well, biological, but cool. I have a personal definition of covenant, and my personal definition is a commitment to each other to maintain the group and to maintain the fellowship. And that's how I personally view covenant. There's a lot of different definitions, but one thing I really love about our group is that people show up, people do stuff. Yeah. And while we may have different preferences on how things are done, a lot of it is preferences when we come to the heart of it. And I think our group is exceptionally wonderful in the fact that we realize that, and we can come back together and go, yeah, okay, that's a preference. We'll get over it. And, I think the respect for the community and each other is unique in groups that I belong to. And because we're a smaller fellowship, it shows. In a large church, you can't really notice that as much. Closing comment, I think it's super sad that people give up joys and concerns, because that's always been absolutely one of my favorite parts of being a UU and participating in this service. It probably is a ritual, and ritual speaks loudly when you were raised as a Catholic. Never goes away, the enjoyment of ritual. But that makes me really sad to hear that. And my first UU membership was First Unitarian Church of Albuquerque. And that was a big church at the time. It still is. It was 500 members when I was there. And we managed to pull off joys and concerns with a microphone, no less. The person spoke with the microphone and someone else lit the candle up front. But, to me, that's just really sad that people can't come to a way to deal with that, because I think that's something that connects us so much, to know what's going on in each other's lives. And anyhow, I have thoughts that are kind of disparate and all over the place, but that's what I'm sharing.
Thank you, Sue. I like that silk comment as well. And that was out of the comprehensive guide. Actually, I'll read it again. Covenant is the silk that joins Unitarian Universalist congregations, communities, and individuals together in a web of interconnection. Thanks.
I just wondered, is the root of the word covenant, is it going with each other? Is that kind of the co and the ven? Like in the Latin, covene. I think vene is to go,
Yeah.
right? So to go with. I'm wondering if that's the case or not. Maybe somebody else knows. Anybody's Latin? How's your Latin out there?
My Latin's
but the concept of covenant goes back to the Hebrew Bible, and it had to do with the relationship that God formed with Abraham, probably the first important covenant. And it was the Hebrew word is berit, and it means, you know, it is a kind of joining together. But there's actions that take place. So Abraham had to circumcise himself and all the males in the household, and that was his share, and then continue to follow God. And as the other half of the covenant was, God would turn the children, the offspring of Abraham, into the Israelites. So that was the covenant. That was the first covenant. And so it was I'm doing something for you, and you do something for me, and then together something good is going to happen. That's the concept of berit in Hebrew. And I don't know about the Greek, but obviously the Greek took it from the Hebrew Bible.
I would like to answer your Latinate the best I can. The co means we, the group, and vene, to go. And I think it means like the group going together. And in my mind, that means going together in the same direction.
Okay.
So walking together is a pretty good literal translation.
I feel like we do a pretty good job as a small congregation, and I'm wondering like how much the complexity of like a whole nation of diverse people, you know, finding norms together or finding a common path together. It's a lot bigger challenge. Maybe there's a bigger reward, like if as a planet we could all be in covenant.
Yeah.
Was there a question there?
I don't know about a question, but some of what you're talking about, I think, is scale, which makes it complex. Scale and languages and long separated histories of evolving norms. And I still think looking toward that is our best choice. And I'm trying to think of examples there are examples, and a lot of people working internationally to bring more of that about, but it's a challenge.
Well, I might suggest that we extinguish the chalice, and anyone who wants to stay online, Ramona is also the co-host, so even if we clear out here, you're welcome to stay and visit with each other as long as you like.
Okay. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we're together again.
Thanks, Cal.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for being here.
Thank you, Cal.
Thank you, Cal.
Sure.
Now it's going to be almost as smoky inside as it is.
Thank you, Cal.
Thanks, Cal.
I'd like to say thank you and goodbye.
Yeah.
And
Ian,
that
and great.
that was
Hey,
about-
Dave. Good seeing you.
Thank you. Good to see you. That was about as welcoming a talk as I could possibly imagine. So I appreciate that.
Spot on. Good.
Thank you,
I
Greg.
look forward to getting to know you better. Thanks for joining us.
See you again next week, I hope.
Great.
Yes.
Ooh.
Good.